Storing your bullion, priceless for peace of mind. Hi everyone and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by ainslie.com.au, the home of Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, Ainslie Wealth and the Gold and Silver Standard. Be sure to have a look. Today, welcome back Bailey, who's been really quite a great addition to Insights here because he can give us all the background information on sort of what's going on behind the scenes because he's working out there with Treasury, working with the bullion all the time. How are you going today, Bailey?
Very good today. Happy to be back.
Well, thank you for coming back. Look, it's an interesting topic today, talking about storage, particularly there's so many ways people can do it. Like at the start, it's storing it at home, so people come in, collect and take it home with them. There's pros and cons to each of these methods, but start us off today talking about home storage in particular, some of the risks, some of the strategies people could have if they want to take that option.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but there are quite a few options when it comes to storing. And I think it actually comes down to each individual's risk appetite. I mean, one person's pro for one storage method is another person's con for another storage method. So if we dig into the storing it at home and taking it away with you, for some people, that is the best method because for some people, they cannot put the price on peace of mind, knowing that they have it in their possession. It's in their control. They know where it is. That's always in the back of their mind that if ever they need to access that very, very quickly, they can just go into the sock drawer or the treasure chest they've buried in the backyard, wherever they've put it, and that bullion is easily accessible. The flip side of that, though, for some people, they can't put a price on the peace of mind for not having it at their home, for all the risks that can come with that potentially. So, just to preface the entire conversation, to start us all off, there's going to be a lot of overlap between pros and cons depending on the individual person. But I've sort of touched on that initially there. What one of the main pros is the accessibility of having it at your home. But what comes with that is also privacy. If you come in and you buy your bullion and you take it away and it's not with a super fund or something like that, you can store that and keep that nice and safe and secure, but not just from a physical sense, but also from a sense of people not knowing that you even have that metal. So I suppose discretion can be the most secure method in a lot of senses for storing. So the other side of it too is comes down to just personal enjoyment, to be honest. I mean, it's a physical metal. Some people out there really do just enjoy having the physical metal to touch and hold. It's a tangible product, which is quite unique compared to a lot of investments. So the fact that we have a lot of range of bars from big to small to coins and all those different shapes and sizes. One pro to storing at home is that you can actually look at it and enjoy it, which I think gets lost in, I suppose, some of the more pragmatic answers that people can give. So, but I think speaking of the pragmatic, no storage fees. Obviously, if you store it at home, you may want to purchase a safe or whatnot. But beyond that, obviously, there will be no fees storing it at home. So, the only caveat I will point out, though, about storing at home is that if it is with a self-managed super fund, you can store it at home. However, we do recommend that you take the advice of your accountant because some accountants, depending on how they've done up your books and your portfolio, they don't like you to have that at home. You can, but as I said, it comes down to your personal relationship with your accountant.
And you've raised a lot of interesting points there around there are multiple options which we'll talk about, but the storing at home one probably depends on the scale of which you're doing it as well, because most people don't have the sort of facilities to be able to store a large amount of wealth in that way. I really like the point you're making about the ultimate form of security there is other people not knowing that you have it, because it's one thing to have it at home securely. Like it might not even be that secure in quotes necessarily. It might just be that no one knows it's there. So it becomes secure because no one knows. It's also, when people have children, when people have friends around that they want to show it to, if they know it's there all of a sudden. They are important points to consider. The other one I think is insurance. And like we know this from dealing with this in the past, really insurers will not, as a general rule, insure bullion at home because they'll go, well, it's too easy to be misplaced or stolen or whatever. That they just won't come at it. So I think that's something for people to consider as well, because it really does depend, like you said, on the person themselves and sort of the scale at which they're doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think scale is a very good point because what I didn't touch on there too is the difference between silver and gold, of course. So the amount of wealth that you can fit into a 1 ounce gold bar versus the equivalent in silver, obviously is a consideration for a lot of people. So obviously it's much easier to store easier in quotes to store gold, because it's much easier to tuck away in maybe a hidden little spot whereas if you have silver, of course, if you're getting up into the tens to hundreds of thousands for those people who have that, then you may want to look at one of the other options that we're going to talk about, because the sheer weight and the inability to move that should come into your consideration at that point. So I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about the other options that might be better
and
for
that makes a lot of sense. But looking at some of those other options, one that has a lot of discussion around it with people is the allocated and unallocated storage, where the bullion dealer, in this case, where Ainslie takes care of the storage for you. They're different options, allocated and unallocated. There's often controversy around this, where people go, bullion stackers by their nature go, if you don't hold it, you don't own it, that sort of angle. But there are practical considerations around that, which is why these other options exist. I mean, we believe that as a general rule as well. We go, well, you want to hold it, but do you want to be on a podcast, for example, talking about gold and silver and storing large amounts of gold and silver at home? That wouldn't make any sense, right? Like, you wouldn't do that. And I think for a lot of people, they're in similar situations, or the scale just doesn't lend itself to being at home. So can you talk to us about the difference between allocated and unallocated, why people choose those options, and even if you want to address head on some of those controversies around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll definitely touch on if you don't hold it, you don't own it. I actually also believe that, coming from being involved with crypto as well. The digital version of that and metals is my background. So I actually completely agree with that. But I think you made the perfect point there, where that is great as a concept, but it only works to a point. There becomes a scale, a capacity issue where there are more risks in holding it than not holding it. So I think it's good to touch on that we all we're a bullion shop. We absolutely understand that if you don't hold it, you don't own it, and we definitely agree. But when you start to get up into that, I suppose more from a institutional investor standpoint, a self-managed super fund, a trust, some of these things, there are just realities that you do have to face. And I think that's where the allocated or unallocated come into it. So I'll go over a little bit of both of those now. So in both of those situations, if we're talking from the Ainslie perspective, we manage the entire storage for you. So obviously, as we've mentioned, we have the facility where you can come by, take it home and do with it what you want. But if you are wanting us to manage the storage for you, you do have two options. So allocated is where you get to buy the specific bar or type or coin or whatever you want. And you can pick that down, a whole shopping list if you want. We will take that, we will store that for you. And that is in your own section of the vault, our vault within the reserve vault, which is we can talk about in a moment. And that belongs just to you, allocated to you under your name. The other option is unallocated, where it's very similar. We manage the storage for you, but instead of choosing specific bar types, you buy into a pool account of metal that we hold at the reserve vault. So instead of having a 5 kilo bar, a 1 kilo bar, a 1/10 of an ounce bar, etc., you're just buying X amount of silver weight and X amount of gold weight. So some pros and cons to those is unallocated is cheaper because the metal is already there. You're not paying any fees. You're just buying into what already exists. It is unallocated by definition and by nature, so you don't actually have to worry about paying any ongoing fees. Now, that particularly for silver is highly attractive, because the fees for silver, because of what I've mentioned before, capacity issues with storage, fees for silver can get it compounds the more silver that you have, put it that way. So I think that's a very attractive option for a lot of people, and particularly those who don't really care what type they want. They just want a nice, cheap option to know that they're holding gold and silver, and that's just a nice, convenient, easy, neat way for them to do that. Particularly when it comes to end of year auditing, they know it's just this amount of silver, this amount of gold, this is the value, and then they can go and sort that out with their accountant. The pros and the cons for the allocated, well, freedom of choice. Obviously, you do get to choose the exact thing that you want. So if you ever want to come and redeem, you know exactly what you're going to get. You know exactly all your little collectible items and all the big bars, small bars. You do get all of that. But the biggest con for that, of course, is that you do pay for it. You pay for the fees and you pay the premiums that are attached to all of those items. So particularly if you're an investor who is throwing some coins in there, we've discussed on previous episodes that the shinier, the smaller, the nicer the item is going to carry a much higher premium. So you're going to pay for that. And then because it's stored, you're not going to necessarily enjoy the fruits of that unless you want to redeem it one day. So that's just a sort of an overview of the two. You sort of touched on, I suppose, some of the controversies around third-party storage in general, but usually, typically, when people talk about that, they talk more about the pool account, the unallocated options. And obviously, as we said before, we are completely understanding of that. We're a bullion shop. We know all the philosophies around it. So absolutely, the concerns around that come down to essentially what you've touched on. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Now, with the pool account, we understand that's fine. If that is not an option for you, that is not an option for you. We are very confident that every single ounce of gold and every single kilo of silver is absolutely matched to metal that exists and owned by Ainslie. However, if you are not comfortable with that, we have a physical bricks and mortar store that you can come in and buy whichever item you want. And of course, if ever you do have the unallocated option, you can redeem at any time. What you do sacrifice, though, is you don't get a choice in what bar type you actually get. That's what you relinquish. So if you do have 100 kilos of silver and unallocated and you go, oh, I don't really want that, you'll get 100 kilos of silver in a form that is obviously most cost effective for us because you've paid a much lower rate for that unallocated silver. So
but it's still a really good point that you get, like you can come in and you can redeem it. It's not like you can't walk away with the metal if you change your mind later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have entire departments at Ainslie there whose basically their whole job is to make sure that we have the stock ready to go for those people. So of course, we cater to everyone. So that is a much more convenient, cheap option for larger institutional investors, typically, and particularly that with silver. But as I said at the start of the episode, one person's pro is another person's con. You said it best. Some people, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. That's fine. That might not just be the option for you. we don't have a horse in that race. It is just a convenient option. And it's worth noting that Ainslie's been around for over 50 years. And I've been there for 8 of those years, and never once have we ever not been able to make good on any unallocated promise. So I know it does get it's a bit spooky out there in bullion world to go into pool gold and silver. So I get it, but I'm very confident in the way that we do it. That's not an issue. But
well, I think you can speak firsthand to that because you've had to lug a lot of it around. So be sure that it's all there.
Done a little bit of that. Yeah, definitely can vouch that it is there and heavy.
There's a lot of lugging involved. Look, there is another option here, which is almost a hybrid between the two, where people get their own account at one of the vaults, and we've got the vault in Brisbane, we've got the vault in Melbourne, and they sort of act like what we do in the middle, but they're the ones in that case that have their own vault, their own key, lock it away. Do you want to talk about the vaulting option? Because for people who might not be comfortable, and to make this crystal clear, a lot of people are very comfortable with the unallocated because once they're familiar with us and they've been around, they've been around the company for a long time, they understand how we do things. They go, why would I pay the extra fees when I can just put it in unallocated? So the reality is a lot of people choose that option. But as you said, there's different options for where people sit on that spectrum. The vault, to me, is a nice, convenient sort of in the middle approach to this that has the security without the handing over control aspect of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about the vaults?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on it. It's a perfect middle ground between the unallocated and the allocated, and even the taking it home option. So for clarity, the two previous options were if Ainslie, the company, manages the storage for you and does it all. You only see the metal if you redeem or if you make that request. Whereas in this situation, this is still storage at a third party. However, you now are also dealing with a third party company, either the Melbourne Vault or the Reserve Vault. So they are private, independent vaults. We, Ainslie, are the majority owners of those vaults. But in this situation, you are purchasing off Ainslie like a regular customer. We will deliver to those vaults for you, fully insured, free of charge. but you then have to then go and create that relationship with the vault, either the Melbourne Vault or the Reserve Vault. You open a safe, you pick the one that is best for you, whether it's a safety deposit box or a bullion locker safe, and they'll discuss all of the options with you, of course, depending on what you need. You hold the key, and then you have to make the appointments with them to actually go and assess the metal, put it away. So, as you said, it's a hybrid between those two. It's still stored there away, but there's just a bit more active management from the customer. So, I think for people who have again, that peace of mind that they can't put a price on, they want to see the metal and actually put it away in their safe themselves, to know it's there, that it's locked up, that they hold the key. It's not sitting at home under the pillowcase, so they don't have that fear of the risks that can come with that. But then, if there's that, if you don't hold it, you don't own it aspect, then they can get rid of that fear as well too. So it's definitely a good middle ground for those people. I think the cons for that are rather evident. It requires active management. The vaults are located in the respective cities. So if you live far away outside of the city and you can't necessarily get into the city to vault your metal, that can create some hiccups. Now, the vaults themselves have solutions around that as well, custodial. And of course, if you're ever interested in that, we can get in contact with the Reserve Vault or the Melbourne Vault. They do have those options as well. But you do have to actively manage that with, you have to create a relationship with an extra third party as well. So just a bit more work involved, I suppose, with that. And of course, cost. So you will pay per the actual safe or bullion locker safe or box that you're getting. So depending on how much metal you're actually looking at storing, you'd have to look into a cost benefit on how much you've got and which option would be the most cost effective if cost was your only variable that you were considering.
And they're very impressive facilities too to go when you go in there. Very secure. It does. You feel very confident as you go in there about the security of the metal. And I mean, you pointed out before, that is where we use, as Ainslie uses those facilities to store the metal for customers for those other options anyway. But it's quite impressive when you actually see it yourself. Look, to wrap this up, I want to bring back one topic that I mentioned at the start, which was insurance. And you also, it probably could wrap into this, some of the regulatory considerations. You mentioned that around self-managed super funds, for example, sometimes not so much regulatory, but more what your accountant or provider wants to see. When we talk about insurance, really those other options other than at home are the ones you kind of need, because we can get insurance and the vaults can get insurance because of what we're doing and the processes and procedures around that, which actually should add a lot of credibility to people who are questioning that as well, because those insurers do not do that lightly. But just maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that for people who might need insurance.
Yeah, and I think that's an absolutely great point, Chris, too, on the insurance too. I mean, with us, all of our storage is fully insured and underwritten by Lloyd's of London. So that is just something that you get to add to that peace of mind. So if you go with the vaults, I do believe that they offer complimentary insurance for value up to $10,000. Now, of course, there are, you can have that conversation with the vault around increasing that and how you want to go about doing that. Yeah. I would argue in that situation, the insurance is that it is stored in a vault. That is the insurance in of itself. So, it's the most secure facility in Brisbane and Melbourne, respectively. So that having it stored there is the insurance in of itself. And that's just something you don't necessarily get with storing it at home. Of course, you can go out and sort that out and sort that insurance out. But in my personal opinion, if you've got it at home and you raise that flag that you need something insured, all you're doing is defeating the purpose of actually having it stored at home in the first place. You're just letting everyone know that you've got something worth insuring there in that regard. So, of course, from the regulatory point of view, if you are one of those institutional sort of investors for a company, a trust, a fund, and depending on what you're storing and you're set up with your accountant, that's highly attractive as well too. Sometimes depending on what you buy, if it's coins in a super fund, it has to be stored in a third party. So as we mentioned at the start, a lot of pros and cons. And of course, each person's situation, what they want to buy, how they want to do it is completely individual. So my best advice for all of this that we can't cover on a short form video content is to get in contact with one of the customer service representatives at Ainslie, and they will be able to walk you through your specific situation, what you want, what risk tolerance you have, what costs you're willing to pay, what the fee structure is. So I think that's probably the best advice I can give, because just to bring it all back to the start, one person's pro is another person's con. It really just comes down to each individual person's risk appetite and what they want to actually get out of their investment.
Look, we're always very conscious when we put these insights episodes out that, we cover as unbiased as we can. I know there's it would feel like a lot of product placement in that, but at the end of the day, we're trying to educate people and let people know how this all works, and hopefully people will find that really valuable, to know what some of the things that we offer are, and more importantly, offer a little bit of balance, hopefully, in it's not, storage isn't necessarily for everyone. Keeping it at home isn't necessarily for everyone. I think they were really great points that you raised, and it's always valuable to have your insight on that, Bailey, because you sort of see behind the curtain of how all that works. So I think that's really valuable. So thank you very much for your time and effort on that today. I know people will really find that useful.
Perfect. No worries. Thanks again.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.